Welcome to the Church Resource, where we talk about the best resources for pastors, leaders, and lay people. I'm your host, Jeff Oliver, looking today at the book called Wired That Way. It is written by Marita Littauer and also insights from Florence Littauer, who have written extensively on personality testing. Now, before you turn this episode off, let me tell you that, and I'll get to the end of the book in just a moment to tell you why you should read this, but I think this is a very good resource for you to have in terms of personality types. Many times, because of my past experiences with personality types, I'll tell you that I don't put much stock in them. I think that it pigeonholes a lot of times, and so it becomes almost like astrology does, and say, well, this is my star sign, therefore this is why I act that way, therefore I can't do anything else. This is, well, she just acts that way because she's a, fill in the blank. And so then it gives some kind of label to somebody and say, almost like their behavior is well, it's excusable because their bad behavior might be something that is a characteristic of that personality type, or as I said, that star sign. And so it's, what else would you expect them to do? This is not telling you that kind of thing. This is what your tendencies are, what your personality type is. And by the way, there's oftentimes a secondary personality trait or type that is very close in number as they rank those things that are, so as we look at all the characteristics of the test, which there is a test for this personality profile in the book, which I appreciate, that as you rank these things, that there's going to be one that stands out, and there's going to be one that usually is a close second. And so there already we're seeing that there is some flexibility in this. There are some ways that you can enhance your personality trait. There are some ways that you can overcome the weaknesses that are inherent in each of the personalities. And even especially as you connect with and interact with other people who are important to you in your life, you want to know how to overcome some of those weaknesses, how to blend those characteristics and those personalities together in a way that will be effective, not just in making excuses for bad behavior again. So I do want to point that out right from the start, that many times I will just out of hand neglect and reject really this kind of approach. But I think this one's a great way to look at this kind of personality system and being able to go through those. I think it's important too, and it's great that they recognize this right up front, that there is a table here. I'll show you if you're watching this episode. There's a table at the beginning of the book right there off the bat that says that it recognizes that there are many theories and systems of personality typing that people have done, and that generally things break down into four main personality types. And it talks about what those main types are as it relates to the four types that are addressed in this book. And so we start with leading from your strengths behavioral assessment. I'm most familiar with probably that and DISC, which you'll talk about in a moment also, but things like, and this is back to Gary Smalley and John Trent came up with this, and it is the four characteristics of an otter, a lion, a beaver, and a golden retriever. If you're familiar with their work, you'll know those things right off and how those characteristics, those traits play out. Also in DISC, you might be more familiar with that we have influencing and interacting. That's the first of the personality types. Also, there's dominance. Then there's compliance/cautious, the third, and then there's steadiness. So those are part of the DISC theory. And then they go through several others. Larry Crabb has one personality typing system, again, four main types. Alessandra and Cathcart has another. There's one called True Colors, and so on. There are several here that are mentioned, and it's just a comparison chart of some of the personality systems. I think it's great for you to be able, if you're familiar with one especially and want to look into this book as to what they say about those personality types. I think it's very helpful. Now, what they're going to do in this book, the Littauers will take a look at these four personality types that they address, and it really goes back to the ancient Greek and looking at what the Greeks would have called the four humors, or the four fluids that are in your body. They attributed certain appearance of, or the amount of a certain fluid or humor in your body to certain personality types. And it was a theory they were working off of there. So the Littauers use that, and the personalities are broken down into sanguine, choleric, phlegmatic, and melancholy. Now, they add a qualifier on the beginning of each one of those, an adjective that more defines that kind of trait, that personality. And so they're going to call it popular sanguine, powerful choleric, peaceful phlegmatic, and a perfect melancholy. So there you see they're starting to distinguish some of those things, and then they give a couple of paragraphs about each one of those, of each personality type, and you're going to give just a brief example of what those personality traits are in each of the types, and what some of the things that person has as key strengths, key weaknesses, emotional needs, that they tend to like people who do these things and certain traits, characteristics, and that their dislikes are generally these things. And as leaders, they tend to be a certain way. As the people who they look forward to marry, they usually have certain other traits. And I think that that's a great way to lay that out, and a helpful, very practical way to look at these personality traits. And so you'll see yourself in many of the traits there in at least one of those. And as I said, there are secondaries. And so that's where we get to the chapter of personality blends. What this means is a blend within your own person, that you're going to see one of these personality types that is far and above the main one that you operate out of, that you are comfortable with and how you deal with. And then there's almost always a second that's really a close second, that is some other blend of characteristics that maybe you don't have 100% of one of the personality types, but you're going to have some other things that are more consistent with a second personality type, and then how that blends together, what that makes you in a unique way. And so I think that's great for them to make a distinction in that you don't always operate 100% out of only one personality type, but you do have a blend. You are not able to be pigeonholed because you are a unique person, and they're going to tell you why, and get to that foundation of your uniqueness at the very end of the book. And again, stay tuned for that, because I'll tell you about that at the end. Another chapter that they go through some of the differences in how we can interact with other people. That is so important, that if you have X personality type and you marry somebody with another personality type, well, here are some of the ways that they're going to say, look, we can almost predict. They're not claiming to be prophetic, but they can almost predict how you and that other person, depending on what your two strongest personality types are, how you're going to relate to each other. Some of the hurdles that you'll have, some of the difficulties, some of the arguments you'll have, some of the ways that you come together as well, and things that you can agree to, but also where there might be some areas of friction in that marriage. I think that's great that they would put something like that in there, and a recognition that we are not, as John Donne said, no man is an island. We're not somebody who lives life solo ever, but there are people we come in contact with, colleagues and friends and family, certainly our marriage, that is to be our deepest and truest and most long-term relationship, is that person you have as a spouse. So that's how marriage relates to these personality types, and appreciate the Littauers bringing that out. The last chapter, and I do want to tell you about, I've been telling you that there was something coming, and a kind of a surprise at the end. They get to spiritual life. These are Christians, by the way, who that's one reason that I would tend to agree with this theory and these personality types, is that these are Christians. They're telling you about these personalities, but also as it relates to people who you know in Scripture. They're going to talk to you about what is the quintessential of each personality type. And by the way, Jesus at different times and at different settings, depending on context, had each of them. He was 100% in every one of these, but he could borrow from certain personality types or whatever the situation called for. And it's just a reminder to us that again, we're not one-dimensional, that we have the ability to blend, and we have the ability to hop out of one tendency, one particular characteristic or trait that we might have, and to adapt that and to be able to work with someone else in a way that is different from what our norm is, what maybe even our comfort level is. But depending on setting and context, then we can change that. And the example is that Christ did that all the time and was able to relate to other people just by almost mirroring them and working within them in a way that they could understand. So that idea of spiritual life and your ability to step out of your main tendencies and to see other people in a different way, I think is important for us to see that, and we see what some of the characteristics are as people will step out of those roles where, again, they're most comfortable, and then where we're placed into the commands of the Bible, even into some of the spiritual gifts and some of the things that we would do within the life of a church and life of your Christian walk, how you would demonstrate certain characteristics within each of those personality systems and types, that how each type would address certain needs that they see, certain roles within a church or within any kind of ministry. So this is a great part and worth the whole book to read the foundations of each of the personality types and what they say are many of the traits and how those traits blend within you and then outside of you with other people. But really to bring it down to the final chapter, how does this relate to our spiritual life? Because that really is all of life. It's the most important thing and the most important relationships and considerations that we can have in life. Now, I said that the personality profile is in here. It's a couple of pages and really just looking at the strengths, looking at the weaknesses that are possible for any number of people, and you would just check off, well, in this line, I am more of this particular trait or characteristic. I tend to be more like this, and you'll check that off. And then it'll give you a scoring sheet in there to be able to do that. So you don't need to send that off and send your $50 to be able to do that. But it'll show you how to tally that score, how to come up with what are your number one and number two, especially those personality traits, and just to see who you are. And then it's fun and helpful, I think, to go and give this test to somebody else who you care about, somebody you're close to. Maybe it's a spouse, a friend, whatever, that you can understand how you are wired, how they are wired. I think it's especially important on, say, a church staff, somebody within an organization that we can understand, well, this is how we tend to work together. These are some of the things that are going to cause conflict and friction, and here are some of the constructive ways we can overcome that. I think this helps in doing that. The subtitle of the book, by the way, is A Comprehensive Guide to Understanding and Maximizing Your Personality Type. That maximizing word is key. So, Wired That Way by Marita Littauer and Florence Littauer. Wired That Way. Great book. It sets itself apart from other personality type books, and that it does address that spiritual aspect that is so important. And really to understand that is something that's left off of the title here, but I think is inherent and underlying there as we get to the final chapter, at least, that you can see it is, by the way, it is God who has wired you that way, and important for you to take a look at. Well, this is one book from my shelves that's been important to me in my ministry, and I hope it gives you a bit of direction as you prayerfully consider which resources will best help you and the people you minister to. Thanks for listening to The Church Resource. Please make sure that you give us a review, and if you have any suggestions of resources that you would like us to look at, email us at thechurchresource@gmail.com. That's thechurchresource@gmail.com.